Wunderhorse are back with their second album, Midas. Tim, tell me your initial thoughts on the album.
So I thought this was an interesting direction for them to go in, considering their first album, but I'm not disappointed with where they went with it.
Well, I absolutely loved their first album, Cub. We've even got it up on the wall over there. I have nothing bad to say about that album. And I must admit, I don't have too much wrong with this album either. Let's jump into the first track, which is the title track, Midas. What did you think of that?
So I thought it was a cool intro track. It was very lively, although my thoughts upon hearing it was, is this really the best fitting intro track for this album? After listening to the whole album, I felt like maybe it would be better somewhere towards the middle to kind of bring the energy back up. But as a track overall, fantastic.
Yeah, I know what you mean, actually. I feel like there was a section in the album where things got a little bit quieter, and maybe this could have been used there. But I do think it was a really energetic and fun song. Like, for me, it kicked it off in quite a good way. It kind of got me wanting to sing along. I like the little riff, the la 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 la. I liked it as a song, but I do know what you mean about the placement. And then we went on to Rain.
So this was much, much grungier than the intro track. I loved the drums in this track. I think it really helped to carry it through. Not much more to say than that. I just felt like it was a nice little, piece into it.
Yeah, Rain to me maybe felt like a bit of a teaser because it built up quite a lot towards the end as well. I really liked the way that the track kind of built towards a heavier feel right towards the end of it. And then we go on to Emily. Personally, this was actually probably one of my least favourite tracks on the album. I thought it was a little bit repetitive.
So it starts rather chill and then gets heavier as it goes on. And for some reason, it kind of gave me reminiscence of Creed's Higher. The "Can you take me higher?"
It's a mad comparison.
I don't know what it was. It was the intro to Higher kind of sounded like, I don't know. It gave me Creed vibes. But I don't hate the track, but it was definitely one of the lesser tracks on the album.
I agree. And I've also got a question of what has Emily done to everyone? Because so many bands have a song that's just called Emily. Your Boys Bowling for Soup have one.
Yeah.
British indie boys Catfish in the Bottom and have a song called Emily. Emily is breaking hearts out here.
Emily, do low-key be a bitch, though.
Yeah, a piece of advice for the boys. Avoid Emily. But then we go on to Silver. And I thought this is where the album really started to kind of take shape and come together. What did you think?
So Silver has a drum beat that kind of carries the track. It changes how it feels. It's a very funky drum beat. And I was thinking during listening that if that drum beat was any different, or perhaps there wasn't drums at all, the track would feel entirely different. So with that, they kind of made it a little bit more upbeat, a little bit more uplifting, which, set the track nicely. And it kind of counterpoints the lyrics and the kind of lyrical content that's a bit more underplayed, I suppose.
I also thought this was just a catchy indie song, to be honest. And this album goes in a few different directions in terms of what subgenre you'd put it in. But I thought out of any of the songs, this to me just felt like a little catchy indie bop, if anything.
Yeah.
And then onto Arizona, I thought this was one of the more impressive tracks on the album and one of the best written in terms of lyricism on the album.
So this gave me kind of Radioheady kind of vibes going out this track. I actually really liked this track. Listening through, this was my early contender for top track of the album. There's one further down that I preferred more. But overall, really liked it. It had the right kind of, it wasn't like too indie, but it had the right vibes to be kind of like creative indie is what I want to call it.
Thought it had very good production, and I think that this was a theme throughout the album where it's well produced and there's certain moments in the album you can kind of feel the influence of that production, but at the same time it remains kind of raw. There's still the raspiness in the vocals and the guitars, but it's been put together well and in that manner, and I thought Arizona was a good example of that. And then we really bring it down a pace into Superman. What were your thoughts on Superman?
So Superman seemed to be one that you really liked from comments I'd seen on Instagram and such. It seemed like that was one that really hit home for you. It's the longest track on the album other than the outro track, but a lot of that is just filler. And it's a lot more chill than the rest of the tracks. Again, the Radioheady vibes are there. There's a slow build up to a climax, and overall just a lot more relaxed than what we'd heard so far.
I really liked this because I thought going from Silver Silver and Arizona, where it built it up, Superman brought it back down. And I thought the vocals on this track were incredible. I really, really liked this. It felt like something I've not heard in a while from an indie band. It felt like a little bit of a risk, maybe, that not many UK indie bands would put out a song like that.
It felt like late 90s, early 2000s indie, where it was a lot more up in the air as to what indie was. Whereas nowadays it feels a lot more cemented into what you're expecting to hear from a current indie band. This felt like they'd gone, you know what, let's spin it back, let's try out some older stuff. And it worked quite well. For the band themselves as well, I think this track lends itself to their skills.
We went into next a completely different sounding song, the grungiest song on the album, Tim.
One word to describe July, and that is dark. It's the only word that can be used here. I loved it when I first heard it. I still love it now. I think this is probably my favorite track. I was saying earlier that that other one might have been there, but this, when re-listening to it, I forgot that I heard it as a single, and this genuinely is a bop, certified.
This is very Nirvana-esque.
Yes. Yeah.
Top tier banger. And I think one of the more concerning things about this track is if you actually listen to the lyrics, it makes me want to ask Jacob, who was the lead singer, who I assume wrote this, if he's okay, because it was a song about going into hospital, etc. And it's actually very dark lyrics done very well because it matches with the energy of the track. I just love July. It's amazing. And then into what is maybe my favourite track of the album, actually, and that's Cathedrals. Cathedrals, to me, is a hard-hitting indie track. It's got energy about it. It's got tempo. It builds well. It feels grungy but light at the same time. Loved it.
So this has kind of the discordal guitars in there later on, which kind of gave it more of a Nirvana-y feel. It felt like if, I've said this multiple times now, but if Radiohead had a child with Nirvana, this would be the kind of track that they would release. A lot more happier and upbeat. And yeah, I can see why this is probably your favourite track. It's a solid track.
And I think now we're repeating what we saw earlier in the album, where we kind of bring it down a notch again to kind of close out the album. And that starts with Girl. What did you think of Girl?
So this reminds me, there's a lot of tracks on this album that remind me of other tracks. This reminds me of Bloodhound Gang's Foxtrot Unicorn Charlie Kilo. And then when I played the two next to each other, it was, I think it's the chord progression and also the way that he delivers the lyrics. And I'm half tempted to rip the vocals off one and put them on the other and see how good it sounds. But for me, it's a little bit too repetitive and a little bit too simple for it to reach the heights that the other tracks have. It felt like a bit of a throwaway track.
Yeah, I think if you're going to say that about any song on the album, I can appreciate why you would pick Girl for this. I do think there's a lot of good kind of guitar riffs going on in the background. Like if you really listen to it a little bit deeply, I think there's another layer of the song when I've listened to it again and again that I kind of appreciate more. But I don't think it's a standout track from the album. But it's not awful either. It's just a track.
Yeah.
And then we're on to the final song, and that is Aeroplane. I loved this. I thought that this was a perfect way to end out an album. It just flowed really nicely, calmed it all down, and took us to rest.
I liked what they were trying to do with this song, but I don't think they executed it quite right. And also the guitar solo that comes in halfway through the infinitely long track. Weird. Get rid of that. You could have ended the track after 4 minutes, and I think the ending of the album then would have been perfect. Having that horrible guitar solo, I hate to call it horrible, that guitar solo is just not good. No, it's not good.
I completely disagree with you on this. I think I think it added something. It was the band, to me, saying like this whole album has been raw and emotional. And I would imagine that was just like a session that was played and they kind of just left it in there because it sounded good and sounded like a way to close out the album. I completely disagree. I think it's great.
I think the track without that solo would have been a much better ending to the album.
It's not even really a solo. It's more just a couple chords.
It's a mess.
No, but it's a nice mess.
I don't know. I think without that, it would have been a better close to the album, in my opinion.
Oh, I really liked it. Like this would be up there probably on my top 3 tracks of the album.
Really?
Yeah.
Fair.
I don't know what it was about it. I think because I'd listened to the whole thing and I felt like I'd been taken in every direction. I'd kind of been through different emotions with it. And then I just thought this was, I don't know, it felt like the right way to end the album to me.
Fair enough.
I really liked it. But that brings us to the end of Midas. I think one thing to keep in mind as well, this is Wunderhorse's second album. And to me, it's a very special part of their discography already. Compared to Cub, I think they've leveled up. And I very rarely see a band with a second album like this.
So this is their second album, and I think what they've done well is they've taken all of the kind of high points and the stuff that worked off of Cub, which is a lot more disjointed and a bit more like all over the place, and they've managed to kind of create a more cohesive album. They've managed to make it flow much nicer, but whether that means it's better than Cub, I don't know, because it felt a lot more simplistic. It felt a lot more lacking in creativity. There was a lot of songs where the guitar and the bass lines were very just derivative, very simple, but throughout the album, one thing that I will say is that the drums were phenomenal. I really enjoyed the drums on this album.
I think maybe the singles off Cub were slightly better, but in terms of an album listening experience, I actually preferred Midas.
Yeah, Midas is more consistent throughout, but personally, I would say that I do prefer Cub over Midas.
This is starting to already take the band to new heights. Just in the last 5 days, they've had an extra 250,000 monthly listeners on Spotify just since this album came out. And that's just at the time of filming. I remember a year ago when I first discovered them, they were on about 400k, and now they're at 1.1 million.
Fair play.
Which,
fair
you know,
play.
I think they deserve it. I think they've got something special about them, and I hope they continue growing. But what would you rate Midas out of 10?
So my rating out of 10 for this, you're going to be a little bit upset, is unfortunately a 6.5.
You are lost, brother.
Oh, how so?
What did you give the Last Kasabian album?
I don't want to talk about it.
There's no way, though. You need to rethink your ranking system.
I can't. This is just how it goes. What would you give this out of 10?
I'd give it an 8.5.
An 8.5, that high. I think the reason why it's had to be so low for me, Cub, I would easily give it a 7 or 8, easily. But the problem with this album is, like I say, it's kind of lacking in any kind of substance for me. There's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of simplistic guitar, just chords and just bass lines that are just following the guitar line. There's not a whole lot of intrigue in it for me versus Cub, which had so many different sounds, and I expected them to kind of, you know, solidify the Cub sound. But what they've kind of done is they've kind of dumbed it down slightly. They've simplified it.
I think that Cub sounds more repetitive than this, though. This goes from, like, Arizona to July to Superman to Aeroplane.
The album
they're all,
itself, Cohesion, yeah, fantastic.
no, but they're all completely different sounding tracks.
But the tracks themselves are very repetitive. I don't mean repetitive in terms of the track listings. I mean the tracks themselves feel rather repetitive, rather simplistic. But overall, I don't hate it. I just don't love it.
I don't love you anymore.
Oh, no!
I think it's a special album, and I do really think and hope that this is the thing that takes them to that next level. The UK tour's practically sold out. They're gaining loads more fans at the minute, and I do think that out of the recent indie bands that have kind of rose, these are my favourite by a country mile.
This is 100% solidifying the fact that Wunderhorse's music is made to be played live.
Oh, mate, they're so much better live. I actually think that's a good distinction to make as well, because I've seen them live a few times, and then when that real grit comes in, it's so much better.
It feels like one of those bands that's full of the kind of angst that wants to come out, but they kind of play it down a little bit for the studio album because they don't want to, you know, ruffle too many feathers. They don't want to upset too many people and kind of put people off. And then when you go and see them live, you get that loud, raw and raucous sound. And I do think this lends itself to a live setting.
All right, well, that's Wunderhorse. That's Cub. Tim, you're not doing another review with me.
That's not
you can
Cub,
go to
bro.
sleep.
That's Midas.
Oh, Midas. Same thing. I'm angry. Peace. Like and subscribe.